Mitch, Davis, and Tracy, and everyone who's here so far. I see the participants ticking up and up, so that's great. So today is our final five webinar series on web archiving, and the videos from each of those webinars will be made available. So if you've missed any, please don't hesitate to check those out. We did an intro and one on collecting, one on tools, one on ethics most recently. So I'm going to give the briefest of intros to the speakers because they have a lot of amazing things to say. First will be Alex Thurman, who is a friend colleague at Columbia. We worked together for a number of years on web archiving together. And then Sumitra Duncan, who is another friend colleague at NYARC. She's contributed greatly to the field of web archiving, especially with a focus on art over the past, I think, 8+ years, Sumitra, that we've at least been working together. And Meghan Lyon will be joining us as well and sharing her experience as a new web archivist who's benefited greatly from the training that is offered via NYARC's program. So Alex, please don't hesitate to introduce yourself any further. From here until you're done, handing it to you.
Great, thank you, Anna. Thanks also to Metro and to Davis for putting together this great web archiving series and inviting me to take part. My topic today is how the web collecting program at Columbia University Libraries has balanced its core function of building and maintaining long-term open-ended thematic web archives with rewarding participation in collaborative collecting initiatives that draw from an even wider breadth of subject expertise from across multiple libraries and can be more responsive to topicality. On this slide, I excerpt the Columbia University mission statement to call attention to the university's explicit dual focus on both global issues and on its ties to New York City itself, as that pattern is reflected in our thematic web collecting as well. And note that the library's strategic directions emphasize that our collections transcend traditional boundaries of format and domain, helping to explain Columbia's original decision to explore web collecting back in 2008. Since then, our program has built 7 thematic web collections, 5 of which are active, as well as a large institutional archive of the columbia.edu web domain and other Columbia-affiliated web content. The common thread across our largest thematic collections is that they are all conceived as open-ended, recurring captures of the websites of selected organizations whose publications or activities relate to areas of strong research interest at Columbia. New seed websites are added each year to these collections alongside the recurring recaptures. And this all adds up to a lot of data being collected, over 38 terabytes to date. All of our web collections are open to the public via archivit.org and also via this Web Archives landing page within the Columbia Library's website. You can see that our emphasis is on promoting access both to our own collections on the left and to the collaborative collections that we've built with colleagues from the Ivy Plus Libraries Confederation and the International Internet Preservation Consortium, which I'll describe in more detail at the end of my talk. But now I'd like to provide brief case studies of 2 of our long-term thematic collections, namely human rights and New York City places and spaces, and get there at first via Columbia's Archivit partner page. So all of you familiar with Archivit will recognize the partner page default state with the collections tab on top and a scrolling list of our collections. The collection list and descriptions are hopefully informative to users, but since there are only 11 results in our case, the collection level metadata facets on the left are not super important here. But if you instead click on the Sites tab in the middle, things become more interesting because now you're seeing the aggregated seed level metadata for the 3,800 websites that we've archived across all of our collections. Only a fragment of this display fits in my screenshot here, but the collection name facet shows how these 3,800 sites are distributed among our collections, with the 4 oldest collections having the most websites. Because we use some collection-specific custom fields, not all the facets listed there provide insight across multiple collections, but 3 that do are coverage, borough, and status on LiveWeb. So the snippet shown here from the coverage facet illustrates the strong dual collecting focus on New York City web content and global or international content that I referenced earlier. The New York City borough facet is used for both of our big New York City focused collections. And we use the status on LiveWeb custom metadata field for all of our collections to designate archived websites that at the time of designation appear to be unavailable on the LiveWeb at any URL, not just the seed URL in question. If you click on that unavailable facet value, you get 415 results, suggesting that 11% of the 3,800 websites that our program has archived are no longer available at all on the live web. And again, on the left, you can see the breakdown by collection, with the most examples coming from the human rights and the New York City religions collections. The relative volatility of these organizations, namely human rights NGOs and local places of worship and other religious institutions, was part of the rationale for pursuing these particular thematic collections in the first place. So the apparently simple question, how many websites are in the Human Rights Web Archive, doesn't have a simple answer, for reasons that are common to many web collections, but exacerbated by long-lived, carefully curated collections like this one. Inside our Archivit account interface, on the left, I see a seed list numbering 1,098 URLs. And indeed, we have crawled all of those 1,098 seeds, but 91 of them remain private as their captures and or their replay in Wayback have been incomplete or unsatisfactory, though these incomplete captures remain present in the collection's work data. So they're both absent and present. Meanwhile, 1007 is the number of seeds set to public display and therefore the number appearing on the public collection page. But yet another important way that users could encounter this question is via our library catalog, Clio. Because we have MARC records for each archived website in the Human Rights Collection, and each of those records has a series heading, Human Rights Web Archive, Columbia University. Searching by the collection title in the catalog yields 831 records, 830 of which are website level. So another plausible answer to the question, how many websites are in the Human Rights Web Archive, is 830. The reason for this discrepancy is that capturing the evolving web presence of these 830 human rights organizations or projects has required archiving 1007 distinct seed URLs, as many of these groups have migrated their websites to new host domains, sometimes multiple times. So this approach requires accepting the notion of a particular organization's website as a conceptual entity that can have multiple URLs over time, rather than the more popular one-to-one association of website equals URL. Here's an example of a site that has had multiple host domains, the Cuban writer Yoani Sanchez's blog, Generación Y. What appears in Archivit as 3 separate archived URLs is all brought together in our Clio record, so users can see all 3 major iterations of the site since we began crawling it in 2010. Implicit here is that ongoing curation of this collection includes not only monitoring the continuing relevance of the seed URLs, but also updating the catalog record as URL changes are discovered. Anyway, host domain migration helps explain why 1007 URLs have been needed to archive 830 sites over time, but to look in greater detail at why only 699 of the 1007 URLs, about 70%, continue to be actively recrawled, we need to look at link rot and content drift in the collection in more detail. After each quarterly recrawl of the active seeds in the Human Rights Collection, I review and analyze the crawl reports and do follow-up QA to identify seeds with unsuccessful captures or which have gone off topic and are no longer worth revisiting. Via this process, over time, 311 seed URLs that have been successfully archived at least once before and made public have been deactivated from any further recrawls. Last week, in preparation for today's talk, I downloaded from Archivit these 311 URLs and pasted them in batches to the website urlitor.com to run instant checks of their current HTTP status. More than a third of these, 124, yielded a 4xx, 5xx, or other unavailable error message, so they remain plainly defunct. Another 106 were redirected to other URLs, mostly spam or hosting ads, but some to newer host domains already included in the collection. So the deactivation of these 106 URLs also remains appropriate. 81 out of the 311, or 26%, yielded HTTP 200 statuses, indicating a supposedly successful request. But upon inspection, these were overwhelmingly spam, hosting ads, or other off-topic content. 10 of the URLs did yield the original content, but these sites had long since stopped being updated, which is why they were deactivated in the collection originally. Just 3 of the 311 previously inactivated URLs now yielded the originally intended website with updated content. So I reactivated those 3 seeds for future revisits. But the bottom line is that the investigation confirmed that 30% of our 1007 archived seed URLs no longer retrieve the intended content, and that without our ongoing active curation, the collection's topical relevance would be steadily diluted with each new quarterly crawl. So if the Human Rights Collection example highlights the evolution of its seed websites over time, this next example shows the evolution of the boundaries and framing of the collection itself. The focus of the New York City Places and Spaces Web Archive is documenting the evolution of the built environment and public spaces in and around New York City. The collection debuted with just 15 seeds in 2010 as the Avery Library Collection, as its lead curator was Chris Sala, the architecture librarian at Columbia's Avery Library Fine Arts and Architectural Library. The chart shows the steady and then steep growth of the collection, totaling over 500 sites by 2019 and 627 today. The initial subject focus was historic preservation and then was broadened by Chris to include more content about urban planning and public spaces, especially open spaces like parks, and the name became quite a mouthful. The Avery collection was thriving just at the time that Columbia had a grant focused on web archiving collaboration, for which we hired Anna Perricci. One of Anna's tasks was to work with art and architecture selectors from across the Ivy Plus libraries to build a pilot collaborative web archive collection. And the resulting Causeway collection essentially extended the thematic scope that Chris Sala had been using for New York City websites to the other Ivy Plus cities. Due to the Avery Library's existing important collection of Frank Lloyd Wright's drawings and papers, the Avery Web Collection also grew to include up to 75 websites related to the historic preservation of specific properties designed by Wright, located around the United States and even a few overseas sites, but with no inherent connection to New York City, apart from the odd exception like the Guggenheim Museum. So in early 2020, we went ahead and split off the Frank Lloyd Wright websites into a standalone web collection and rebranded the Avery Collection with its sharper New York City focus as the New York City Places and Spaces Collection. And as part of this collection rebranding, I used key collection subtopics and metadata tags to make a word cloud to serve as the new collection logo and archive it. So I wish I had more time to dig into this collection today, but in moving on, here's a quick collage of some organizations that are archived in the collection that no longer have a presence on the live web. So as a comparatively new realm for research libraries, web archiving has always been an area whose practitioners need to look outside their own institutions to exchange best practice information and learn about new technical developments. Throughout its engagement with web collecting, Columbia University Libraries has sought out and helped to foster a larger web archiving community. Two critical partners in that regard have been Metro, which has sponsored presentations and other events on web archiving for many years, up to and including this current webinar series, and NYARC. Sumitra and her colleagues at the Frick Art Reference Library and Columbia together have had ongoing web archiving program information exchange meetings since 2014. And Anna Perricci was instrumental during her time at Columbia in strengthening these ties. So I'll close today by briefly describing two other collaborations with the Ivy Plus Libraries Confederation and the International Internet Preservation Consortium. With these forays into collaborative collection development, Columbia has been able to tap into a much wider pool of subject expertise and contribute to collections on a wide range of topics while continuing to build and maintain its own long-term core web collections. The Ivy Plus Libraries Confederation, or IPLC, started out as Borrow Direct, a resource sharing service that remains invaluable to the 13 academic libraries in the partnership. The Confederation has since broadened to embrace collaborative collection development and scholarly communication advocacy. And in 2017, following the earlier pilot collecting, IPLC formally initiated a collaborative web collecting program with the hire of two jointly funded positions administratively based at Columbia, a librarian, Samantha Abrams, and a bibliographic assistant, Jean Park. The program also jointly funds a dedicated IPLC Archive It account, and it's been extremely productive in its 4 years of operation, as Samantha collaborated with over 140 selectors from across all 13 member libraries to build 28 public thematic web collections. It would take too long to mention them all by name, but they are an extremely diverse and interesting set of topics. Unfortunately for IPLC, but happily for Samantha, she was offered a great new position at the Center for Research Libraries, and last week was her last working for Ivy Plus. But if the thought of working with these collections sounds appealing to you, keep an eye out for the Ivy Plus Web Resources Collection Librarian position to be posted hopefully in May or June. I'll close by mentioning Columbia's productive participation in the International Internet Preservation Consortium, or IIPC, a group of 54 institutions involved in web archiving, mostly national libraries and archives, and some universities. Columbia joined the IPC in 2012, and I've learned a lot from attending its conferences and meeting web archivists who work on much larger scales, including full national domain crawls. Beginning in 2015, I was able to contribute back into this community as a founding co-chair with Abby Grotke of the Library of Congress of a working group using a dedicated and jointly funded Archive It account, much as Ivy Plus does, to build collaborative web collections on topics of mutual interest and transnational in scope, such as the Olympics, intergovernmental organizations, and the centennial commemoration of World War I. Again, harkening back to Columbia University's mission of engaging with global issues. Our largest IAPC collection, and the largest collection I've ever worked with in terms of the number of selected and archived seeds at 12,875 and growing, is the novel coronavirus or COVID-19 collection that we started in partnership with Archivit in February of 2020. Doing most of the crawling and metadata uploads for this huge and heterogeneous collection by over 30 IAPC member libraries has forced me to explore new methods and workflows in Archivit, which I can then apply back to my Columbia web archiving as appropriate. So our collaborative collection development engagement has not only resulted in many interesting new collections, it's also helped inform our everyday practice. So I'll close with this picture of masked Columbians waving goodbye to you.
Thank you so much, Alex. I really appreciate it. That was a fantastic presentation. I'm just going to pass this on to Sumitra and Meghan for them to tell us about their work. But again, Alex, thank you so much. That was really great.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Anna. Hello, everyone. As Anna mentioned, I'm Sumitra Duncan, and I manage the web archiving program for the New York Art Resources Consortium. And I'm really happy to be joined today by my colleague, Meghan Lyon, who is a former web archiving fellow at NYARC, now at the Library of Congress. I wanted to thank Anna for the invitation to participate in today's webinar and to thank Metro for hosting this series. I think it's been a really great lineup and the content has been very interesting. So I'm pleased to be part of it and have the opportunity to share details on the web archiving program at NYARC. So before we go any further, for those of you who are not familiar with NYARC already, a bit of background. So NYARC is a consortial partnership between the research libraries and archives of the Brooklyn Museum, the Museum of Modern Art, and the Frick Art Reference Library of the Frick Collection. The NYARC Consortium was formed in 2006 through the support of a grant from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation with the mission of facilitating collaboration that results in enhanced resources to research communities. And so I'm going to start at the beginning and kind of tell you how everything evolved over time. Over a decade ago, the NYARC Library started to identify how publication methods for the art research materials that we had historically collected, such as auction catalogs, catalogs raisonnés of artists, and gallery publications, were shifting from print to born digital formats. Given the rapid pace at which websites and their embedded pages and files are updated, as we all know, we felt it was critical that we start exploring solutions for collecting and preserving born digital resources that were significant to art and art historical scholarship. Having formed a consortium for collaboration already, the NYARC institutions were well positioned to leverage this existing relationship in investigating the best means of addressing web archiving. NYARC already had experience collaborating on implementing a shared union catalog for the 3 libraries, which is called Arcade, and developing a shared cataloging practice across our technical services staff, shared subscriptions, as well as initiating a shared print program. And to share some key developments in establishing our web archiving program, in 2010, we began the journey to explore the efficacy of implementing a consortial web archiving program with a pilot study at the Frick Art Reference Library. And this pilot sought to evaluate the usefulness of Archivit in capturing auction sale information that was now only being published on auction house websites. In 2012, we had a 1-year grant, which allowed for research on publishing trends and input from our researchers on their current use and need for web-based materials. And we evaluated our existing institutional systems and workflows. In late 2013, NYARC received a 2-year grant from the Mellon Foundation in support of implementing our consortial program. The implementation grant allowed the libraries to actively establish the web archive collections and to develop workflows for managing them. And I was hired to execute the grant to implement our program, and I joined the staff at the Frick full-time in January of 2014. My position was thankfully made permanent following the completion of that 2-year grant period, and I've been able to continue to incrementally expand our collections and further develop our program without reliance on grant funding. And I've been in this role now for 7.5 years, which is hard to believe. Over this time, web archiving has become a really critical collecting activity for the consortium, and we're now archiving over 4,000 websites, which presently amounts to 8.5 terabytes of data. NYARC presently has 10 web archive collections, each of which continues to grow over time. And these include the 4 collections of our institutional web presence. So we archive the sites of the Frick, MoMA, the Brooklyn Museum, and the NYARC website, as well as our project-based websites and documentation. Our 6 subject-based collections include art resources, artists' websites, auction house sites and their embedded auction catalogs raisonnés of artists, New York City gallery and art dealer websites, and websites about restitution efforts for lost and looted art. In the first year of our program, we developed and refined a collaborative collection development policy that was specifically for websites and a consortial workflow for site selection and nomination. Sites of scholarly value are selected and nominated for inclusion in our 10 collections, each of which is aligned with the collecting objectives and strengths of the 3 NYARC institutions. I try to avoid duplicating the effort of other thematic web archives in that if I know a site is adequately captured, publicly accessible, and preserved elsewhere, I wouldn't necessarily pursue archiving that web resource myself, unless it's something that very obviously needs to be included in our collection to complete the scope, such as a new institutional website from one of our own organizations or a gallery in New York City. In regards to permissions, prior to archiving a site, I contact the owner of the site to seek their permission for inclusion of that content in our collections. We archive sites based on a permissions notification model and are utilizing spreadsheets to track all of that administrative data. Agreeing to be included in these web archives means the site will be publicly accessible. Back in 2014, during the implementation phase, we had to make some critical decisions about our capacity to collect web resources that were in our scope. Our scope is undeniably quite broad, given that the NYARC museums together cover the breadth of art and art history from ancient Egypt to present day contemporary art. Thus, we had to rein our collection scope in a bit from our initial broad objectives, which would have been to collect all artist websites or all gallery websites of scholarly value. And we quickly learned that achieving that scale right away with our existing resources wasn't realistic, and it was not even vaguely feasible. Since we couldn't collect all gallery websites, we determined that we would focus just on New York City gallery and art dealer sites. And this was a logical determination that we had already, had a relationship with many gallerists and artists in the city, given that we're based here in New York City. But it's been really challenging even to try to collect all New York City gallery websites, as there are well over 1,000 of them, and they're ever changing and opening, closing, moving around the city, or initiating pop-up project spaces. So this collection has gradually grown to be one of our largest of the 10 collections and contains a rich history of exhibitions from the New York City gallery world over the past 7 years. The significance of our New York City Galleries collection became even more clear this past year as the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted local businesses, and we began to see closures of galleries and artist-run spaces in our city, mirroring the challenges being faced everywhere. And for example, this slide shows notice of the Leslie Heller Gallery closing last spring. Thankfully, we're already archiving the Leslie Heller Gallery in our collection on a monthly basis before the gallery shut down. But what about the hundreds of sites we hadn't gotten to yet that may potentially close? So we stepped up our efforts at the beginning of summer 2020 to address as many of the sites of closed galleries as possible so that at least one capture of each of those sites would be included. 1 year later, and we are unfortunately seeing similar headlines of gallery closures. Here's a press piece about the upcoming closure of Metro Pictures, a gallery that has been a significant part of the New York City art scene for the past 40 years. Thankfully, this news was shared well in advance of their closure, and I was able to reach out to them for permission and now have added them to our collection. Having focused a lot of our effort the past year in capturing already closed gallery websites, our collection now contains archived versions of 131 closed galleries in New York City, not just from the pandemic, but in total. Similar to many other web archiving initiatives, our life cycle for web archiving begins with collection development, curation, and administration, and spans harvesting to quality assurance to description and access, and then preservation and long-term storage. We primarily use the Archivist subscription service for managing our web archives as far as shaping the collections, adding sites, running our crawls, conducting QA reviews, and running patch crawls for missing content. Given our focus on high fidelity captures, we were also an early user of the Web Recorder tool, which fairly recently rebranded as Conifer at Rhizome, with the development of additional Web Recorder tools continuing, such as with Archive Web and Replay Web.page tools. And we've utilized Conifer and the Web Recorder tools for testing out capture of dynamic content that has proven difficult to capture or replay with Archivit. I've also taken work files I've created via Web Recorder and uploaded them into our Archivit account for more seamless access to content within our collections. We rely on the public interface of Archivit to provide access to the content contained within. Quality assurance is of particular importance to our program, as the visual nature of the art resources that we seek to include in the collections require us to fully capture and render and playback the intended look, feel, and behavior and functionality of the content or embedded artwork. If sites are displaying artworks, it's highly important that they're adequately captured and then rendered as the artists intended. At the close of December 2020, we were faced with the deadline for use of Flash in websites, as Adobe had announced that they would cease to support it and it would be blocked from web browsers. MoMA's website contains over 60 microsites that are almost all exhibition pages that were developed entirely with Flash, or that have embedded Flash elements, many of those dating to the mid-2000s. NYARC already has these important sites archived in our Archivit collection. However, being able to view and replay these significant properties that are integral to MoMA's history was of concern for the future, due to this dependency on Flash. So we began to archive the sites anew in NYARC's Conifer collection, utilizing the tool's remote browser functionality with Chrome version 76, which has Flash emulation. As these files cannot presently be replayed within the Archivit Wayback environment, since that doesn't offer Flash emulation, these captures live in a separate location from our other regularly conducted captures of the MoMA website. MoMA is now linking directly to NYARC's Conifer captures from their live website's exhibition pages so that they're not lost from public access and reference. And as another visual example of what I mean by quality assurance, here are two of my favorite snapshots of archival web captures from early on in our program. I probably overused this slide at this point, but it's a favorite. The one on the left is the result of a regular crawl of the MoMA homepage by the Internet Archive's automated crawler. And the one on the right is from a crawl conducted at the same time and of the same homepage by our team at NYARC and assured for quality. From this one static image, you can get a clear sense, I think, of why quality assurance work really matters. Quality assurance of our web archives has really not been the easiest to tackle, and it remains the area where we lack the resources to truly work at scale. Having team members over the years that can focus specifically on QA work has been integral to our success, even if those team members are part-time, as there's just really no way that I could do this level of QA on my own while managing the program and our projects. So I'm really fortunate to have one part-time web archive technician, Mary, who does QA for the MoMA websites and some New York City gallery and art resources captures, and also contributes to our cataloging of the web resources in our collections. And our web archive fellows, presently Jack and Miranda, who also play a crucial role in the level of QA that can be conducted to our regular captures of the Frick, Brooklyn, NYARC, and gallery websites in our collections. So switching gears a bit, now I'm going to give you a very brief overview of our description and access approach for these collections. We create bibliographic records for all sites being archived in our Archivit collections, which are available via Arcade. Again, that's NYARC's Union Catalog, and through OCLC WorldCat. Full text search is also available via the Archivit interface. And we're additionally providing access to our Archivit collections through NYARC Discovery, which is our version of the Ex Libris Primo Discovery product. This integration allows researchers to search the full text of our web archive collections alongside all of NYARC's other library and archives holdings within that one search interface. And this is, I believe, the first implementation that unites Archivit search results in this way, and the integration utilizes the OpenSearch API. So here's a screenshot of our Archivit collections. This is where all 10 of the collections can be found. They can be browsed and searched via full text indexing here. And then here's a screenshot of NYARC Discovery. So circled there, you'll see the display of Web Archive collection results as the default. So those are results being pulled in via the OpenSearch API from our archived collections. And this is an example of those results from a search of the keyword Rembrandt. If you were to click on View All Captures, you would go into NYARC's archived collection and see all of the search results for that keyword. And then here is an example of one of the catalog records that we create for the resources included in our collections. This is for the Bruce Silverstein Gallery. If the site is still live, we will link to the live site as well as the archive site and our record and the record in WorldCat. So even though I'm talking quickly, I don't think I have time to do this section of the presentation justice, but I wanted to talk a bit about outreach and collaborations within and outside of the web archiving community, as they really make up a large part of what I spend time on. I'm active with several special interest groups related to web archiving, as well as in conducting workshops and outreach talks to graduate students about web archiving. And at NYARC, we're also participating over the years in a number of collaborations for web archiving grants and other projects for tool and software development, which I'll discuss just in a bit of more detail before I hand things over to Meghan. And I wanted to mention specifically the Art Library Society of North America's Web Archiving Special Interest Group. I co-founded and have co-led this group for the art libraries community since 2016. And we'll be meeting next week on Thursday, the 29th, in advance of the start of our annual conference. So this SIG meeting will be open to anyone, regardless of whether they've paid to attend the full conference. So you will need to register for the meeting itself. And NYARC has also partnered on grants with colleagues at the Internet Archive to expand the collection of art resources via a collaborative cohort model. We completed a grant last year, which had been funded by IMLS, called Advancing Art Libraries and Curated Web Archives. This was a national leadership grant in the curating collections category, and as a part of it, we met with and surveyed the art librarian community and compiled their feedback as stakeholders and how we could move forward in developing a model for a larger shared collecting mission. We honed in on areas of subject-based collecting of highest interest for art libraries to first tackle in web archiving, and determine the best model for developing shared research collections and access infrastructure of subject-specific born digital art resources. Since then, we have submitted grant proposals to make these shared collections a reality, and I'm really pleased to share with you all that we've just learned of an award to the Internet Archive with NYARC as a partner for an NEH grant for the project Preservation of Born Digital Web-Based Art History and Culture, which will start in the early summer of this year. So we'll be sharing more details about that on April 29th at the ARLA Special Interest Group meeting. So if anyone in this audience is based in an art library or archives and interested in learning more, please join us and find out how you can get involved. And the NYARC team has also participated in beta testing and feedback on a variety of tools and softwares in development over the years. We were pleased in the past couple of years to partner along with Columbia University Web Archiving colleagues on an NEH-supported project of Old Dominion University from their computer science school that focused on the development of time map visualization, a web service to provide visualizations of how individual web pages have changed over time. And this tool will display thumbnail-sized screenshots of previously archived websites from web archive collections, and will choose a small number of representative past archived web pages from a large collection. 4 visualizations offered included an image grid, an image slider, timelines, and animated GIFs. Another recent collaboration I've been involved with is with Archipelago staff, so Diego Pino and Allison Lund at Metro, and web recorder developer Ilya Kramer and Emma Dixon. So many of you may already know that Archipelago is an open source digital repository software under development in affiliation with Metro. And through our collective work together in our web archiving interest group over the past year, we've used NYARC's web archives as the test use case. And now Archipelago allows for the display and integrated playback of archived websites, so WARC files and WAXC files, via system integration of ReplayWeb. And one of NYARC's current web archiving fellows, Jack Patterson, is furthering this work as part of his fellowship project right now, which he will also be presenting on at the upcoming Artlist meeting. And last but certainly not least, one of our most significant collaborations to date has been part of NYARC's Web Archiving Fellowship Program. Through an ongoing partnership with Pratt Institute's Graduate School of Information, I've hosted 2 and occasionally 3 web archiving fellows per academic year at the Frick Art Reference Library. And this has been ongoing for about 8 years now, I believe. And at this point, I've hosted about 20 Pratt fellows and have trained them on web archiving and NYARC's workflow. So this has been very much a rewarding and mutually beneficial relationship, I think, as the students have made invaluable contributions to the QA of our websites, worked on focused projects or beta testing of tools and development, and have contributed to the cataloging of archived websites after training with a cataloger from the Frick staff. Many have gone on to roles that involve born digital preservation or working in museum libraries and archives, and I think it's been highly valuable as far as hands-on experience. And I won't say any more about it myself. I'll hand it over to Meghan now to discuss the fellowship program more from her perspective as a former fellow in our program. Thanks so much. Over to you, Meghan.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Meghan. I was a NYARC Web Archiving Fellow from 2019 to 2020. This slide gives you a brief overview of my experience from the fellowship to being a librarian-in-residence on the web archiving team at the Library of Congress. When I entered grad school, I had no prior web archiving experience. In fact, my entire introduction to digital collections and skills happened after my first semester in library school. I entered with a background in assisting studio artists as a painter with a little bit of traditional archiving experience in the arts. That experience flowed nicely into the subject matter that I would be working with as a web archiving fellow and technician. As a fellow, I worked 1 day a week at the Frick Art Reference Library. The fellowship included 120 hours of on-site work per semester and was paid for through a tuition stipend from Pratt. I completed a practicum along with the fellowship, which included an independent web archiving project. My time as a fellow was a learning experience. During the first few weeks that fall, Sumitra provided readings focused on the history and current status of web archiving. And then I learned how to web archive 1 step at a time. The first step was learning QA. I was responsible for quality assurance of the Frick collection, which includes the museum's website, Instagram, and Frick Futures website. I also did some QA for the artist websites in New York City Galleries collection. As a fellow, I learned to use Archivit and, importantly, how to communicate with a vendor to troubleshoot capture issues, which is something I do regularly in my work at the Library of Congress. I also learned about alternative crawling technologies. Within NYARC's workflow at the time, we used Web Recorder to capture hard-to-get dynamic content and social media. And so during the spring semester, I continued doing QA, and I developed a practicum project to explore the use of web archiving technologies to preserve web-based materials for contemporary artists. In collaboration with interdisciplinary artist Devin Kenny, I created a collection documenting web pages integral to Kenny's professional history. I used Archivit to collect Kenny's website, which was added to NYARC's artist websites collection, and attempted to capture social media to varying degrees of success with Web Recorder. The practicum, as a course offered by Pratt, also required a write-up of the work experience gained on the fellowship site. So more detailed descriptions of my day-to-day work as a fellow can be seen on the Google Sites page that I made for this project, which is the top link on the slide. COVID hit by the middle to end of the second semester of the fellowship, so I finished the program remotely. That May, after graduation, I transitioned to working 30 hours a week as a web archives technician for NYARC. In that role, I exclusively worked on the New York City Galleries collection with the entire NYARC web archiving team, which at the time included Sumitra, Mary, myself, and our colleague Jan. As we did when we were fellows, we provided page-by-page subject-specific assessment of content. One of our primary goals was to make sure that each archive website matched the live one with a high level of fidelity. Unlike the fellowship workflow, which was mainly QA, this project allowed us to work on the full life cycle of Web Archives content, from selection to test crawl to QA to final, which meant ready for the public and scoped appropriately for continual crawling. I completed the test to QA to final process for about 104 new seed URLs over the 8-week period. Increasing my web archiving practice from 1 day a week to almost an entire week sped up my learning process significantly, as did working with a large bucket of websites and collaborating with a team. Since we were working together on just one collection for the first time, we learned a lot as a group. We shared all of our spreadsheets, including an issues tracking spreadsheet, which helped us get a sense of what was happening across the board in the collection, such as which types of sites were easy to capture and which were difficult and why. So the work I did at NYARC directly correlated to the type of experience that the Library of Congress happened to be looking for in their Systems and Standards Librarian-in-Residence in 2020. While other coursework completed during grad school played into my preparedness for my role as an LIR, the digital content management section and the web archiving team were happy to receive someone with web archive specific training, particularly in QA, and with a fresh perspective from working with Archivit, which the Library of Congress does not use. The Librarian-in-Residence program is a relatively new program. I was part of the 3rd cohort, and it is aimed at giving entry-level professionals experience working at the Library of Congress. While I was in that role, I completed a project combining Web Archives crawl reports with collections metadata to create a novel data set for examining Web Archives collections, which was used internally for programmatic planning. I also focused on crawl QA for contract crawls and tracking results for crawls run with Browser, and I learned how to crawl in-house using Heritrix. I couldn't have done any of this without the fellowship, and I feel very fortunate to have been a part of the program, and I'm grateful to Sumitra and NYARC and the Frick and Pratt, and really enjoyed working with Sumitra and the team. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Megan. Thanks for joining me in this today as well. We have one final slide. Just wanted to share some links to our collections and our documentation, and I want to point out the NYARC program documentation link, the wiki, our collection development policy is there, our QA workflow, which I'll have to say is out of date, is there, but it was created when we were joined in 2015 by a National Digital Stewardship resident, Carl Rainer Blumenthal, who was able to do really focused, excellent work on improving our QA workflow, and documented all of that, and was kind of the first piece of documentation like that I think existed. So we've shared that pretty widely. We do need to update it, but it is there, and I encourage everyone to take a look. And then the Web Archiving SIG link is there, and I will update the events page on that so that everyone has the registration link. And here are email addresses if you have any other questions, and I'll hand it back over to you now, Anna. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. Thank you both. That was really fantastic. And it was great to hear about the work that's being done and the impact of the training program as well. Thank you so much. And I hope that this series has inspired more interest in web archiving and helping people feel more prepared to learn a lot more, because there's a lot to learn, and we're excited to have more and more people participating and contributing. So thank you all. I really appreciate it.